This is your host, Stephen Sargeant. Got a different shirt, a little bit of white, brighten up a little. We have an amazing episode on the Around the Coin podcast. We talked to Brian Muse-McKenney. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of Episode 6. They have a payments infrastructure. We talk about BaaS and SaaS and even CaaS. Cards as a service is a thing too. We talk about traditional banking, what are the challenges and bottlenecks, and how, the evolution of the payments infrastructure around the world. We get into WePay, Alipay, everything that you can think of that is powering entrepreneurs, that's powering the tech sector. This is such a great episode. And they're also hiring. So if you're looking to get into tech, maybe listen to the whole episode. And Brian says, hey, reach out to him as episode 6 is growing. This is a great company, great organization, but an even better conversation with Brian. Hope you all love it. Let me know if you do. This is your host, Stephen Sargeant, the Around the Coin podcast. Today, we're going to talk about payment infrastructure, maybe even a little bit of banking as a service, and talking about, small businesses getting capital. We have episode 6, Chief Revenue Officer, Brian. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe tell us what a Chief Revenue Officer does, because I think people have heard the term. They think they know exactly what you do, but I think maybe you do a little bit different things than people are expecting.
Great first question. Good to be here, Stephen. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Brian Muse-McKenney. I've had a long career in banking. Spent 16 years working at HSBC and at Citi in executive roles within payments, deploying payment products around the world. And I joined Episode 6, which is a financial services infrastructure provider. So we power banks and other financial technology companies with the infrastructure through APIs, cloud-based services to build and run a wide range of products from credit cards to virtual accounts, installment loans, and actually joined as having been customer number 2, which I'm happy to share more about in that journey. And, in terms of Chief Revenue Officer, really that's responsible for growing the business. We operate in over 30 countries today, serve over 50 enterprise customers that use our technology to serve their customers, over 25 million end users. In terms of that, like day to day, we met everything from marketing and brand and strategy, creative, sales, partnership development, the whole end to end needed to grow revenue for a growth company like Episode 6.
That sounds like a lot of work. Why the name Episode 6? It sounds like it should be a video game. Maybe I'm getting like the Rainbow Six vibe. Why the name Episode 6 to talk about the whole infrastructure when it comes to payment and other financial products?
So we have 3 co-founders, and they've been in the payments industry for about 3 decades, and this is their 6th venture. And so when they set it up, originally we started in Asia, in Hong Kong and Japan. And they said, this is our 6th one. Why not call it Episode 6? Subtitle, big Star Wars fans.
I love that. Talk to me about, you've been in banking for, as you said, over a decade now. What has changed in banking maybe over the last 10 years that you've seen, especially when it comes to payment infrastructure? And what unfortunately has stayed the same that maybe Episode 6 is looking to maybe mix up a little, maybe not disrupt, but maybe evolve, especially when we think about like archaic and payment rails that we've seen disjointed. Interoperability is always a challenge. Talk to me about what's changed and maybe some of the things that are still the same.
Yeah, great. So I would say 2 big external changes and 1 evolving internal change. So the 2 external changes are the rise of real-time payments. What we're seeing in the US now with, Fed Now, all around the world, faster payment infrastructure is being set up that, really kind of change the dynamics of the traditional payments landscape, moving things into real time, bringing down costs, improving quality. And so that's forced banks to change. The second has been the emergence of quite powerful fintech non-bank solutions. These obviously started in the consumer space. They've been moving upstream into the commercial space as well. And so in both of those factors, there's a case for change for banks to deal with. And that internal change has been that increasing recognition of banks need to do something different if they're going to effectively compete in this modernizing, evolving new payments world.
You said that the founders started out in Asia. We're seeing here in North America. I'm in Canada. I have several friends in the US. The challenger neobanks, open banking hasn't really been embraced like we see in places like Europe, where a lot of the organizations and fintechs aren't trying to be banks. They're trying to provide every service, except for that one service that they would need to be classified as a bank. What are you seeing in the places like Asia as I believe you're in over 35 countries around the world. What are you seeing in places like Asia? Is this second nature an open banking system, or is it a little bit more closed off like we're seeing here in North America?
No, it's a great question. In Asia, the regulators, I talked about faster payments, real-time payment schemes. More broadly, I would say regulatory proactiveness in developing payment innovation and creating rules that enable better pricing, better services. And so a big thing that's happened in Asia is digital banking licenses. So you're seeing these in Singapore, you're seeing these in Hong Kong. Obviously, you saw it sort of originally within China, and that does enable the non-traditional bank players to actually get a banking license that allows for that core deposit, operating current account. That's the sort of missing link of a lot of the neobanks that we see in the West. But I think that's quite converging, that within, you had Square building out their own bank. You've got Revolut, and their recent announcement saying they're still on track to get a banking license. I do think that being regulated as a licensed provider is something that has a lot of value, and that we're seeing that trend moving in that direction.
Talk to me a little bit about episode 6. Where do you guys fit into this ecosystem? You mentioned infrastructure. If you look on your website, it looks better than the banking website. It seems like you offer more services that, let's face it, customers actually want to use versus a lot of the bank services that we're seeing right now, where, traditionally they have the traditional customers, but people are looking for more innovation, whether it's crypto, whether it's access to, as you said, real-time payments. Where does episode 6 fit? And explain to us, like, we have a payment audience, but explain to us, like, I'm a 5-year-old.
Okay, 5-year-old's a low bar, but I'll take that on. So our offering is infrastructure to help licensed financial services providers build and operate those payment products. And so when you see on our website the range of products that we offer, we're really looking to target banks and financial technology companies that want to offer those digital first, modern experiences that we know customers want, and to do so in a way that's secure, instant, always available, and feature rich. And so we're providing, it's a software as a service, so it's a cloud-based offering available via APIs, along with an operator dashboard for the bank or the fintech to run their programs, and giving them the empowerment to create market-leading products that their customers will love.
I love that. And I love on your website, it shows like some of the things that are trending, or maybe it's like your best products. You're like, oh, we really love these. But buy now, pay later is huge, especially with the young economy, young society we have now. People don't want to wait, right? People don't want to save up for a year to buy, a brand spanking new bike or cool shoes or a fast car. People want it now, and they'll make payment, they'll take the lower payment. Talk to me a little bit about this buy now, pay later model. And what has been the biggest challenge with, talking to a traditional financial institution saying, hey, this is what the generation wants. You need to align with these services or API into these services ASAP.
Yeah, so obviously the original buy now, pay later play by the likes of Klarna was a disintermediation of the traditional card business. And so they went direct to merchant, integrate at that checkout page, and then drive distribution to consumers and have this, frankly, superior service for those types of purchases available at checkout, point of sale. Now, where a lot of the industry is going, and this is where banks have, I think, started to wake up, and we're seeing a lot of traction and interest in this space, is you can actually bring that buy now, pay later service into a card offering, so that as you have a credit card product, enabling customers to select purchases that they've made after the transaction in many cases and say, let me actually term that out as an installment. And that way, there isn't the need for a sort of a direct integration into the merchant because you already have the traditional card rails there. Both Visa and MasterCard are really responding to this emerging need of buyers. And so enabling these type of installment solutions more coupled into the card processing infrastructure. That's really the shift that we're seeing, and banks are realizing that if they want to offer a competitive credit product, that buy now, pay later, frankly, needs to be part of that solution.
And how does that benefit the customer? So I'm already using credit. Let's say I'm using my Visa. Let's just say I bought a furniture set. I moved into a new house. It's $3,000. How does that benefit the consumer to break that up maybe into 12 payments a year from now versus just paying it off whenever they get the money?
Yeah. So the best illustration of that is that the traditional model for buy now, pay later was really a no interest offer, or maybe like a flat fee offer. And when that model, as banks look at that, some like our solution that allows banks to offer this is you can choose a fee, you can choose an interest rate, you can choose the combination of the two. What we're seeing is that they're typically offering a rate that's below what their credit card revolving rate is. So say the revolving rate's, at like 22% or whatever, so now different by customer, maybe the installment rate will be 8% or 10%. So for the consumer, I can lower my interest payments related to this sort of one-time purchase and have that extend over a period of time where hopefully my, earnings will be coming through and I can, pay that off in a way that ultimately delivers a better outcome than if I just left it on my revolving credit card balance.
And how does that benefit the bank? The banks have been known, some of the banks, that interest rate is predatory in some cases and very beneficial. You're a chief revenue officer, very beneficial to their bottom line. Is this, a lower interest rate attracting more customers, more utility, more data and information around purchases? Like, how does this benefit a banking partner to offer this product?
Great question. So I think that a key principle to financial services more broadly that historically has not been there perhaps as much as it's needed, but with the digital age, it's now pervasive, is transparency. And so providing transparency to customers of what they're having to pay is sort of the first part of the puzzle. And then as customers have increasing options that are quite easy to sign up for, providing options with transparency that provide better outcomes should drive more loyalty from those customers and thus greater usage from those customers and other potential cross-selling of additional products, and should attract new customers. So in this sort of competitive world, increasingly competitive world, I think the bank faces an option. Well, we can keep doing what we're doing. That's higher margin and hope that customers don't leave. What I've seen from banks is that when they're taking that approach, it's just like slow bleed. So that the customer doesn't typically say, you know what, I'm closing this account. But what they do is they just start using it less.
Using
So
other services on top of that more for their basic needs, right?
Exactly. And at some banks, I've seen analysis showing they can actually see that customers are, because they can see how they're paying from their account and that they're sending money to these alternative providers. And now they're able to dimension, we're actually bleeding 20%, let's say, of our revenue wallet with this customer. So what can we do to bring that? And that's where bringing in better services has got to be the answer.
You talked a little bit about market share. Why wouldn't banking, large banking, traditional FIs run to episode 6 and say, hey, we want to offer these services so that these companies aren't going to the services that offer these, not you, the infrastructure. They're not going directly to the competitors and Fintech and using them directly. Why wouldn't more banks want to, especially with API, into a lot of the products and services? What are some of the challenges that you see, or maybe even pushback from some of these banking partners? Is it just kind of like archaic thinking, or do they have such a large market share where they don't feel the need to kind of innovate?
So that's a great, That question really hits the crux, I think, of where banks are at this moment. And so I think probably the biggest impediment to change is their existing technology stacks. And banks, we forget, were at the leading edge of technology evolution. They were the first ones to take the Oracle databases, the first ones to take the IBM mainframes and develop commercial applications, create current accounts, move off of ledgers that were written, create the ATM. These things were at the cutting edge of technology in the 70s and the 80s, right? But within that initial push, banks really ingrained themselves in that older technology. And so when you look at a bank's tech stack, they are quite old and not flexible and rigid. And so to bring on new products and services is an undertaking that requires investment. Now, we have a solution where you can attach our platform as a sidecar to your existing core, which is an implementation pattern I did with HSBC. Even that, there's effort required. A lot of providers are looking for, I might have to rip and replace. And those things then come to the second point is risk tolerance. So banks are, in a place where they're still making money, and the case for change, you can counter it, that sort of risk aversion. Well, we could do something new, and we could, try to be bold, or we could just do what we're doing and just kind of take the, steady as it goes incremental approach. And there are many people in banks whose job it is to manage risk and manage compliance. And obviously that's critically important. And so it takes a combination of progressive thinking across the bank, not just on the business and the product side, but also on the technology and risk side, to come together and say, we need to do something differently. And let's really work at how we can do that in not just an effective way, but also a safe and secure way, because you don't want to get ahead of yourselves and push too far. We've been seeing some of the pushback of that and the impact in the industry of moving forward with solutions that are not secure and reliable. That's the foundation of banking, is trust. That cannot be compromised. Fortunately, modern technology, using it well, is able to provide that safety and reliability while still providing those newer products. I think we're just in the middle of that evolution and journey.
It's a growing pain, right? And what you're talking about is probably around this banking as a service kind of phenomenon, where we've seen, organizations like Synapse, backed by VCs like A16Z, pretty much collapsing, unsure a lot of times of who's holding which customer fund, which, I come from a crypto background, that, those silos of customer funds and where they're being used is always a huge issue. What went wrong? Looking at someone that provides banking as a service applications, where do you think, and I know you don't want to talk, maybe negatively about your customers, but maybe highlight some of the things where companies, banking partners, and the fintechs could go wrong as they're, evolving and getting into this banking as a service relationship.
So my personal view is that the best place for banking as a service to be provided is directly from a bank into a platform, whether it's a fintech company or a SaaS company or an e-commerce company. Whoever wants to embed financial services, procure them directly from a bank. The model that evolved in the US, really because there was not another solution, was to have these, middle players that came in, sat between the platform and between the bank to create the services that the bank wasn't frankly able to do themselves. Well, what did we do? We added another layer. So the end customer is now further from the bank, and thus the risk controls everything. There's just another leg in the journey that by definition adds risk. And so when I was at HSBC, one of the things I led was the creation of a banking as a service division. That was the premise of it, was let's go direct into. And so that was something that HSBC did, for instance, that I led, which was integrating banking as a service directly into NetSuite without a middle layer in between. I think that model is where the industry is going. The conversations that we're having with banks now, they see this direct BaaS model as the one that's going to have better risk, better control, frankly, better revenue dynamics. If you think about the profitability of the business model, if there's the platform and the bank, that's two participants to share the economics with while also serving customers in a way that creates value. And if you versus the other model, the third player in the picture as well. So I've always believed that's the better model. I think that banks have lacked the technology to do that. I think they're now seeing, working with companies like Episode 6, that there are infrastructure providers that can enable them to do this. And I think that's where we're going to see this go.
What was the benefit of using this middle, this intermediary? Was it just kind of knowledge? Like they didn't have the knowledge to go directly to the fintech, kind of like when, blockchain consultants came out. Instead of just going directly to the blockchains and working with them, the consultants would come, take a high price, kind of like guide them to which blockchain worked the best. Like what was the benefit from a banking partner to want to use a middle person versus going directly to Episode 6?
So I would say there were two advantages in the model. So one was distribution. If I integrate into, one of those companies, then they will help me get to many more fintechs and SaaS companies that want to embed banking services into their applications. And so it's like a one-to-many attraction. Rather than, at HSBC, we had to go and negotiate a deal with NetSuite, Oracle. And so that distribution benefit is definitely there, especially for smaller banks that don't have, partnership teams that are able to go out and negotiate with, VC-backed tech companies and do this sort of model directly.
So let me just to clarify, are you saying it's a leverage thing? If you go through a middle company, they also house several other companies. They have a lot more leverage to negotiate directly with the fintech because they have more buying or bargaining power versus an HSBC going directly to a fintech where it's just one-to-one now. You're leveraging just for yourself. You're not kind of coming in with other clientele or other possible business. Is that the kind of what you're talking about?
That would be one element of it. And the other element is just the resources it takes to actually go and do all those deals and the negotiations, the sales effort, the legal documentation. So it's sort
you
of
only want to see so many demos, I think, at some point if you're HSBC.
And then the second part was that technology was a much simpler implementation. So all the underlying bank had to do was create like an FBO account, link in a couple of different parts of the infrastructure. They didn't have to enable, the API part of the platform that fintechs were connecting into. They didn't have to enable the KYC and onboarding. So it was an easier technology solution to implement than sort of doing a direct BaaS model where you have to sort of bring an end-to-end solution with a good API portal for developers on top of it.
And there lies in the risk, right? If you're not doing the KYC, if you're not doing the onboarding, you're also not controlling the quality of, the customer and what needs to take place and vetting them properly. You're kind of outsourcing that, which is never a good idea if you're a bank, even if the accounts are held within your institution.
I think that's exactly what the OCC is saying. The thing you just perfectly summarized the challenge.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where do you see this? So you're saying direct to, direct to Episode 6 would be great, or directly to a platform is great. Where else is this, after these collapses, after you're going to see probably some regulatory pushback now, where do you think the industry is going to be heading? Are we, 12 years into crypto kind of thing where it's like regulation comes down, some companies are going to have to adjust their business model, some will just go out of business altogether, and, we'll continue on with some of the blue chip companies like your Coinbases? Like, what do you see now happening in BaaS?
Yeah. So to clarify one point, Episode 6 would provide a bank that wants to participate in banking as a service the infrastructure to do so and have a great banking as a service solution in the market. And so someone that wanted to do banking as a service would be a customer of ours.
Right.
And then say that the fintech or the e-commerce platform that wanted to embed financial services in this model would go directly to the bank who has created an infrastructure to enable that solution to work at scale with security and compliance at its heart. And so that's the sort of direction that I see. I think, we've seen, some bigger banks like JP Morgan launch an embedded banking unit. We know that there's another one like Fifth Third created one called Newline We're seeing a number of sort of community, regional banks that are now looking at this direct BaaS model. We'll have some announcements to share later this year, probably at Money 2020, on some that we're powering. So I think that model where banks say, what we'll do is a best in breed solution. We'll build together with the best, KYC provider, with the best payments provider, with the best cards provider, and we will power a fully API enabled real-time infrastructure that fintechs and brands and platforms can connect into to embed those financial services in their applications. And I think that's going to work because as a human, as a person, as a small business, having those financial services in the applications that I'm using in my day-to-day life makes a lot of sense. There's convenience. There's a way to create, cross-product journeys that go beyond just your traditional banking app. And so I think that model carries a lot of credibility. We've seen it with the user numbers. It's definitely become a popular way of consuming financial services. I just think the industry is going through some growing pains and a shifting landscape. I do suspect that one or two of the sort of tech players that are, sitting on top of the banks will get the right risk and control models, will be able to get that right. But I think that part of the industry will probably consolidate into one or two winners.
What are your thoughts on, you talked earlier about China and Asia when it comes to, WePay and Alipay? Everything's kind of built into those ecosystems. I was in Dubai earlier this year and last year, and it's like one app does everything. You can order food, groceries, make payments, call Ubers. What do you think about these like super apps almost? And how does that impact something like that you're providing? Is that what you are, like a super app where it's like they can come to you and get access to all these different services and products that customers actually want? What are your thoughts around these like super apps around the world?
Yeah. So super apps, the question that I've dealt with directly. So at HSBC, Hong Kong was the biggest market for the bank. And the regulator there created a new e-money license that was an invitation for Alipay and WeChat Pay to enter Hong Kong. And so their strategies were, let's take the super app that, dominated China. Let's go into Hong Kong. And so HSBC faced a pretty big dilemma, which was, what do we do? And what the bank decided was to fight back and create their own social payments app called PayMe. I was the chief executive of that unit. We were a fintech within the bank. We got a separate brand, got the setup. We knew we had a technology disadvantage. That was clear. So what did we do? We went and scoured the world for who's got the best payments infrastructure that we could build a payments app on top of. And we chose episode 6. This was me being customer number 2 of episode 6 while at HSBC. We ended up building this app called PayMe, scaled that to 70% market share in Hong Kong. So we fought right back and more than doubled the combined market share of those two super apps in the market, which was a big success. HSBC ended up leading the Series A round in episode 6. I was a non-executive director of the company for 3 years before joining. So it was a really great success story. And I share that because the super app appeal is very high, but it's really hard to land in a new market. It's much more effective to start with a single product and grow it from there versus trying the super app play, which in China, it evolved effectively in some other places in Southeast Asia because there were no other options. If you look at the US and Canada and Europe, there's a proliferation of apps that all provide, their piece of what they're doing. And I think the model that is most successful is starting with one use case. At HSBC, it was this like social payment. So basically Venmo of Hong Kong now, paying each other back and forth. Start with one service and then build out from there. Now, so for popular apps that are looking to build into financial services now, obviously you have what Apple's been doing. There are opportunities to build out. And I think that like incremental, like let's build one more product, starting from a platform that already has scale is a viable strategy.
And do you believe maybe that's why like Facebook Pay and those type of things were like paying within apps? I know Twitter's looking to come out with like blockchain-based payments as well. Do you feel like that's why maybe those aren't gaining as much traction because there are options like Cash App, Zelle, Venmo in North America that's like, hey, we're already using these. I don't want to log into Facebook to send somebody money.
That's perfect. A perfect description. I would say that I think the innovator's playbook is quite clear that you have to 10x what's currently available to
Right.
actually change consumer behavior. And so the Facebook Pay example, just choosing one versus Cash App and Venmo, frankly, even PayPal, is this 10 times better? Not really. And so it takes that level of differentiation. I think what Apple's been doing with the Apple Card and that evolution of that whole space within payments is taking a more disciplined, methodical, incremental approach that may prove to be more successful. Very fascinated to see what X will do.
Funny because Apple, all they have to do is add discount, like add like reward points, like Starbucks does, that people get discounts off their Apple products. And pretty sure they can corner the market based on that methodology right there.
Add value. You need to create additional value that can't be captured elsewhere.
And that's beautiful. Like we talked a little bit about Asia, China, a little bit about North America. Tell me, you're in 35 countries. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Like are certain countries, we do a lot of podcasts here and with other clients in Africa where, blockchain stable coins very, very big there because of, the fluctuating economy, the devaluing of their local currency. Do you have any other jurisdictional use cases where you're like, hey, these customers right here in this jurisdiction, they love our revolving credit because it's so hard. You can't just go to the bank, ask for a loan or ask for money.
So first region I would highlight is the Middle East. I think it's been probably about a decade of a lot of talk, increasing action, central banks, regulators playing a leading role in helping to form discourse and pilot programs. And it really feels like it's now taking off, where the Middle East is really serious about payments innovation, infrastructure, broadening out beyond their traditional sectors. And so whether that's within UAE, we just signed our first deal we announced earlier this year in Saudi Arabia with a great company called Loop that is basically creating financial infrastructure to help power Saudi Vision 2030. There's a lot of investment going into the Middle East, and payments innovation has risen into that where it's moved beyond discussion and is now into action. So I think the Middle East is a really exciting region from a payments innovation standpoint.
Are you shocked about how quickly they move there when they have made, they might talk a long time, but when they actually take action, how quickly things move from a government level?
So it's interesting when you say how fast. So one of my previous roles was Chief Innovation Officer for HSBC within global payments. So I had a team in the Middle East that was looking after innovation. And it was like the slowest moving region for some time because it was a lot of talk, a lot of workshops, a lot of discussions. So at that part of the experience, I wouldn't have used the word fast, but I think that's now the right word because the groundwork's been there. Some of the consensus has been built. Some of the experimentation has been done. Things are now moving with a lot more speed. And I have been surprised to see it, but very pleasantly surprised. I think it's a great region for payments.
Do you see, like you mentioned Saudi Arabia, and I believe it's Saudi Arabia that has the Neon project, which is like their own basically, I want to say startup city, but it's basically they're building a city, they're building its own infrastructure. Where do you see episode 6 coming into like these startup cities, these digital cities and saying, hey, we can actually power a whole ecosystem? Is that possible based on your platform? And do you think you'll see more cities, within jurisdictions being like, hey, we kind of want to be our own, have our own financial ecosystem? We're seeing here El Salvador and, using stable coins like Tether. They're kind of building out their own ecosystem. What are your thoughts around that?
It's a great question for a chief revenue officer because I think that really hits at another entrance point of scaled innovation. And that's where public sector intersects commerce. And we have seen that, take transit, for example. Transit has historically been this sort of like closed loop system where you're only doing it for one thing. We're now being invited to participate in large scale transit commerce innovation transformation programs. Some of them are in cities, some of them are in entire countries, now like smaller European countries, for instance, where they see the transit experience. It sort of lies at the heart of people's day-to-day lives. So can we build that out to do, real time, always available, secure, feature rich payment solutions for the people using them? And so that's absolutely in our sweet spot. It's something that we're really excited on. Those programs, by definition, go slower because there's much bigger stakeholders involved. You're dealing with government entities of, whether, fully government or quasi-government. But I think that trend is happening. There's one that we signed in Asia Pacific that's quite innovative that we'll be announcing later this year. The schemes are involved in these sort of things. So I do think what you've articulated is something that we're going to see. The ways that our cities evolved, historically, payments, to say they were an afterthought is probably overstating their influence in how things were thought of and designed. Now, I think that opportunity is a lot more linked.
Do you think also, especially around transportation, is kind of like not theft prevention, but almost like they're taking a lot of losses when it comes to counterfeiting, traditional tickets. They're trying to move a little bit more digital. Do you think that has a little bit of aspect to it that, hey, we're tired of losing money here? Why don't we just build a payment ecosystem? And also data is huge, right? If they have enough data on where people are getting off and what stations and, what ecosystem like malls and other things are around them, that is also very valuable to, a broader ecosystem. What are your thoughts around that?
I think that's perfectly said. I keep emphasizing security and risk because anything in payments, that's got to be the foundation. And so, revenue leakage that's taking place, from a city's perspective or a state's perspective, that's real, that's cost. And so that's absolutely part of the value that's looking to be captured and corrected. And then when it comes to data, there's so much you can do when you now have real-time information to just better understand where the opportunities are, where further development should go. Payments is a critical part. It's not just like where we are, but it's where we spend and what we spend on. And that ability to mine that information to develop, better services in better locations, it's logical.
I would love to know what your thoughts are around. I know we've had 40 minutes of high energy conversation. I hate to dull the moment. But when I think about APIs and infrastructures and banking partners, my mind directly goes to what you say, compliance and risk, but also like tax and accounting. Like who's responsible for tax and accounting and keeping track of all of these moving ledgers that are, as you say, a real-time payment? What are your thoughts? Is that a concern of like these large institutions? Like, yeah, this sounds great, but this also sounds like a lot of extra paperwork and a lot of extra reporting.
Yeah. So one of my personal beliefs is that regulated financial entities are best placed to deliver financial services, which sounds pretty straightforward, but in some areas might be quite controversial. And within doing that then it brings responsibility and accountability that's clear to ensure that the accounting, the reporting is all taken care of to meet the standards of the regulations and authorities of that jurisdiction. Now, obviously, there are new technologies that can do so in different ways. Within the sort of banking and payment space, having a bank grade ledger is of critical importance. That's the part of the E6 platform that drew me to it in the first place. What we've seen in the recent industry is when the ledgering is compromised, the whole thing is compromised. The amount of money that is in each account, all the transactions that have taken place off that account, and then off the back of that, the accounting and reporting, it has to be done with 100% accuracy, 100% of the time. So that can't be compromised. And I think that what we've seen in some instances that has been compromised, and we're starting to see the consequences of those mistakes.
Brian, we're 45 minutes in. I'm a little disappointed. You haven't mentioned the word blockchain or AI when talking about your business, and that doesn't make sense to me. where did, like you just mentioned Ledger, where does blockchain maybe fit into some of your infrastructure? Maybe, you have customers that are blockchain companies or crypto companies, and that's part of like kind of their payment rails. Does blockchain fit anywhere in your ecosystem? And, where could in the future if it doesn't already?
Yeah, so the way that blockchain fits in, and we have a couple customers that do this today, is that episode 6 can be an off-ramp into the fiat world. So attaching to a crypto wallet, the ability to convert into a fiat currency, attach that to a card, and go and spend it in the real world, enabling customers to maintain their crypto balances, but actually use them in more day-to-day applications. So that's a use case that's actually gained a fair amount of momentum for us in the past 12 months. I would say there was obviously with the sort of crypto winter, whatever we want to call it, things kind of cooled off for a bit, but it's the use case is quite clear and I think resonant to provide that like off ramp into fiat with like day-to-day spending behaviors.
And no AI, does AI power anything that you're doing, or is this kind of all very much API technology? I would say I don't want to say the word traditional technology, but innovative technology that doesn't really need AI at this time.
So using our technology does not require AI. And as a real-time platform where all data can be streamed real-time in the patterns that work for you, we do have customers that are taking the data from our platform and streaming it into their AI environments, data lakes, machine learning models, so that they can then use the data coming from our platform, apply AI into that, and deliver, whether it's like different products, cross-sell, product improvements, understanding their customers better, that side of the sort of AI puzzle. We ourselves don't provide the AI services, but we provide the real-time data for you, the customer, to then perform your AI to fulfill your use cases.
We've seen what's called AI washing. We're seeing, companies just kind of sticker on that AI on top of pretty much traditional services. What do you think when you see that around the industry, that everyone all of a sudden now they were offering very similar services, maybe not as great as what you are, and now all of a sudden they're AI services and they're getting a few more meetings from VCs and a few more meetings from banking institutions than they were normally? What are your thoughts around if that is even happening?
I think it is happening. Any one of our inboxes is a testament to that. I would say I take it cautiously and would want to better understand the actual application that's being promised and how extensive AI is or isn't a part of it. But using AI in the tagline from a marketing standpoint, obviously right now is something that is resonating. And then I think we'll see a shakeout in terms of which ones are actually developing real AI applications that add real value and which ones are a bit more smoke and mirrors. And
Just
so
APIing into chat GPT.
So I'm personally a little cautious, I would say.
We've heard about BaaS, we've heard about SaaS, even, RAS, ransomware as a service in the crypto world. But you have something called CaaS, cards as a service. Maybe this is like a fun marketing play on words, or maybe like tell me exactly what that ecosystem looks like.
So cards as a service is an ability for a licensed cards issuer to enable their customers to create and launch any type of card product. So from a single platform, right? Think about how Apple has been using the Goldman Sachs Marcus infrastructure to create and embed their card offering, right? So that is a service from the bank where you can, using this cards as a service infrastructure, create different type of card programs. It can be consumer credit cards, it could be debit cards, it could be commercial cards. And from that cards as a service platform, you can create any of these. And ours is sort of like a multi-tenant platform, which means that if you're a bank looking to distribute these different card solutions, every time a customer uses, and by customer, I mean like a B2B type where they're going to take the platform, create a bespoke card program that has different types of card, different schemes potentially, BNPL, rewards, fees, pricing, risk controls, all these different permutations, set up that program and then launch it into their application. So it's an infrastructure that allows someone to distribute cards in various different permutations into various different channels.
We've seen a rise in like influencers and like just communities like Mr. Beast. Where do you see a Mr. Beast using your infrastructure? Would it be like, hey, like a Mr. Beast card, or like, hey, Mr. Beast is offering maybe revolving credit to other content creators? Like, where do you see these people that have mass, kind of like a WeChat and Alipay, where they have mass amount of users and they just haven't flipped that kind of financial product switch on? Maybe they shouldn't. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the creator economy, this embedded banking concept, makes a lot of sense. It's a bit of a different use in that there's these different units of values, like these coins, obviously, points, like all sorts of different units of value that are being exchanged, some of which have clear monetary value, some of which have soft monetary value, some of which have just social value. And so that's where I think the ledger opportunities are to sort of create this interoperable ecosystem of these different units of values, which can be exchanged often in quite micro transactions.
Right.
I think a lot of different pieces of the puzzle need to come together. I would see the social platforms as likely the ones that would be best placed to try and do so, and with creators and influencers being one of the key focal points of the ecosystem to make the flywheel effect work.
Yeah, because a lot of the issues are for them is like they want to create more, they just don't have the capital to do it. So they have to kind of draw that capital from or monetize off their audience, which kind of like lessens their value at some point. As soon as you ask your audience for money, you kind of lose that leverage versus them having, a way to get access to revolving capital that they can create more that will maybe lead to more brand deals and instead of monetizing directly off their audience. Where does I know you can't talk about? It sounds like you've been hinting at some things coming out for episode 6. You might have to wait for episode 7 to kind of see what some of those things are. What are you looking for in episode 6? What are some things that you can talk about, maybe in generality that you're excited about? Partnerships, ecosystems. You talked a little bit about Saudi Arabia, or just some personal things that you're like, oh, this is kind of interesting. We see it in our world. We're not going to get involved in it, but that would be cool for other people to try and execute.
So one that we have announced, that's actually a great cards as a service example. In Singapore, Diners Club was spun off, taken private, and has relaunched as DCS Cards. And what they're offering is a one-stop shop for any fintech, any SaaS platform that wants to create a card product in their application can come to DCS. And DCS, using the episode 6 infrastructure, cards as a service, is enabling that banking license. DCS has a banking license. They're doing all the sort of customer service, and then the physical cards, virtual cards, credit cards. And they've also introduced a really neat rewards program and a sort of DCS token, which starts to go into the crypto world. And so that is an offering that DCS is now driving throughout Singapore and also looking more broadly across the region. I think that ASEAN region has tremendous potential. Frankly, the whole global South is primed for these types of accessible innovations. And so I think working in partnership for episode 6 with a company like DCS, formerly Diners Club Singapore, is a great combination that brings accessible financial services with large scale distribution.
That sounds super cool. You mentioned customer service. Why are banks dead, in your opinion? The customer service, usually atrocious. We're seeing a lot more community banks, especially in the US, using banking as a surface to be more, connect with their customers more, provide more value. But why aren't these traditional, with so many options? Why do you believe that, we had Brett King on who kind of came up with the bank 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 model, but basically he's been saying for over a decade that, banks are in trouble, but they seem to be thriving financially and profiting quite immensely from what we've seen. Why aren't they losing that market share, in your opinion?
So real quick on the customer service lens and tying back in the previous conversation, That's one of the best generative AI use cases from my perspective. Improving customer service within financial services. I saw Klarna, had done a proof of concept that proved to be quite powerful. So I think that's an area that I know banks are looking at, and I can see real application there. In terms of banks' positionings, so having worked for 16 years, quite senior roles across a couple different big organizations, the bank brand attracts in. And when the money's there, banks make money off money. That's the business model, make money off money. With interest rates having risen, that business model has become even more attractive. The core commercial banking, retail banking model is more profitable now given the higher interest rates. I think a few years ago, like 2021, there was this fascinating dynamic playing out where the market cap of the leading fintechs was starting to really eat into the pie of the market cap of the banks. And I can speak from firsthand experience that there was a growing sense of concern. I wouldn't quite say panic, but concern. But what's happened since then is like where the fintech world, both the publicly traded ones and the VC backed ones, had a drop in their valuations, and banks, post the little mini crisis here last year, really reasserted given the better economics from the interest rate situation. So now banks can look around and say, hey, we're doing pretty well again. I think those banks that rest on their laurels at this point in time are going to be in for a rude awakening over the next, let's call it 5 to 10 years. Those that are more honest with themselves and can see the actual customer data that, we might still have Stephen as a customer, but we only have 80% of his business now. Now, that 80% is worth a lot more, so it's great. But that other 20%, a year ago, it was only 10%. So it's a slow bleed. And then how are you going to get the Gen Z in? How are you going to get Gen Alpha in when they grow of age? Those cohorts are not working with traditional banks. All you have to do is play it forward 5, 10, 20 years. These generational impacts are real and they're really happening. And I can say for certainty, there are banks that are taking that seriously. And even the ones that are taking it seriously, though, there's going to be internal detractors and doubters. Right. And so some banks are going to be quite effective at addressing it. Others, best intentions in the world, probably aren't going to deliver. So we'll probably end up seeing more consolidation.
And why do you think that rise in like the fintech attraction was it kind of like, hey, everyone's gone digital, the pandemic Peloton effect, where it's like, hey, we all have to buy Pelotons because we can't go to the gym. But then when we can get back to the gym, people are running back to the gym, and the Pelotons are now $3,000 paperweight.
So why did fintechs rise to that position? Better products, better services for customers. What was most effective when I was at HSBC and starting up the Pay Me journey in Hong Kong is I'd pull up the Alipay app and show bank executives, look at what I can do as a customer. Now let's look at our app and get the difference, right? And so the reason that fintechs became valuable is because they were offering better products, and customers want better products. I mean, it's really that straightforward. Now valuations maybe got a bit ahead of themselves. That's, all relative, right? So that reality of better products is still out there, which is why banks need a modern technology partner like in episode 6, who can help them quickly build those digital first products that meet those customer needs while still maintaining security and compliance and risk standards.
And I think you provide a wide range of strategy, right? You've dealt with a lot of banks versus a bank that never dealt with a fintech before, not really knowing what to do. You can kind of say, hey, these are the concerns. These are the challenges that we ran in with customers that are your side. But hey, these are some of the benefits that we're seeing right away if you kind of flip that switch. That's what I like about like consultancies and companies like yours that have a wider range of, products and services and customers. You have a lot more knowledge base than versus, a bank dealing directly with a fintech, I think.
It's like you were just reading my sales script. In all seriousness, so that consultative part of the selling process is really valued, in particular by banks who are looking for that expertise. One of the things we like to say is that we're trusted by banks and delivered by experts. And I think that is something that really resonates because banks won't have that experience, at least not at scale.
And I'm a customer, like, not a joke about the sales, but it's like, yeah, when I'm a customer and I have customers all around the world that are sending me funds in Great British pounds, it's like, and my bank is only allowing me to open up a USD in a Canadian bank account. And it's like, okay, now I have to get them to convert the funds. Now, which account number do they use? And, it gets very tricky. And like, hey guys, I'm getting paid $5,000. Like, this shouldn't be that hard. I should be taking a massive hit on multiple exchange rate just to get paid out for 1 month of services. So to your point, as like a lot of customers and small businesses, we see the value in like, hey, bank, you need to step up. We'd like to use you. We trust you, but we also need to operate our businesses, and we also need, to be able to offer our client some kind of benefit in using it. Versus like when a lot of my customers are like, hey, use Wise, we'll send you the funds through that way. It's like, well, why can't my bank be as innovative as a company like Wise that they can just send funds directly to me?
That what you just laid out is exactly the case. It's a perfect articulation of the case for change within banks, because you and people like you, over time, your business will bleed if those services aren't brought into the banking experience. It's quite simple.
I love it. Where can people get a hold of you, Brian? What are your socials? Do you open up your LinkedIn DMs, or you kind of just let them pile up as a big red button at the top of your?
I am reachable at brian@episode6.com, on LinkedIn as Brian Muse-McKenney. I do read my DMs. I'm not the most responsive, but if anyone comes through after this, I will make a point, anyone that references this podcast, to reply and set some time up.
I love it. And is episode 6 hiring? And should we let the people know, are you hiring kind of in growth stage? What's going on with episode 6 when it comes to
episode 6, Series C, absolutely in growth stage. We are absolutely hiring here in the US, in Europe, in Asia, really around the world. So if you're interested in a job, we've got jobs listed on the website, but also reach out to me directly and I'll connect you to those opportunities.
I love it. Last question. If someone's like, hey, Brian, kind of cool guy. He has so much knowledge. He has a kind of similar work experience as I do. Like, how does one become a chief revenue officer? I don't see MIT, a lot of those people offering those courses, or maybe they are offering 8-week masterclasses. What is a little advice for someone that's like, hey, chief, you're probably like, hey, chief revenue is a cool, position. Is it someone that with a sales background that like has a lot of experience? What are your thoughts about someone like getting into a position like yours?
That's a great question.
That's the only one that's subject today. It's like, how do we become you, Brian? How do we become
more
you?
Early stage career, like longer track, or more like late stage career, like looking to make a move? How would you?
I would say like, hey, like, or someone very much so traditional VP, traditional banking experience, where they're like, hey, like Brian's having a lot more fun than I am. How did he transition from, doing certain projects within the bank to kind of now leading a complete SaaS product, which a lot of people are coming into the technology companies. I know there's a lot of layoffs now, but we're going to see another surge of people leaving traditional institutions to get into crypto, fintech. How was that transition for you?
Yeah. So I'll maybe, so in terms of the transition, it's been super empowering and invigorating. Working within a bank, I had an experience where to get a new product launched, I had to get 168 approvals. That was the product governance process of the bank, right? And when I joined episode 6, and like my first week, I was like, we don't even have 168 people yet. We're now at like 180. So we're over it now. And so the empowerment, the ability to be creative, the ability to solve problems, experiment, put things into action versus a traditional institution is a real enlivening experience. It's different when you're at a big institution. The brand draws people in. When you're working for a sort of scale up or a startup, you got to go find the people and pull them in. So there's some different dynamics there at play, certainly. In terms of the transition, so I think I always said the most important part is be curious and learn new things. So if you're listening to this already, you've kind of already got box number 1 checked. And then within that, it's start networking. So, talk to the people at your institution that are more on the edge of innovation. Try to work into that team if you can. Like attend the industry conferences, like really get out there. And then if you're really interested in making the move, start making a list of what are the types of companies that I think I can bring the most value into, while also it's got to be a combination. You bringing in value and them having need for that value. And then you also being interested in the space. And so start making a list of companies that actually fit the criteria. And there can be some sort of bigger brands, but then do some research and try to find some of the earlier stage companies that are also there, and then get out and start talking to people. I think the thing that is always a bit more difficult is if you're just like cold applying, the hit rate, it can be a discouraging experience. And
Right.
so using a network, building a network, having that curiosity, learning, trying to get positioned within your bank to be doing more things that are at the more innovative, cutting edge, at least within the context of the organization that you work. Those are going to all be things that can start to position it. Probably won't happen overnight, but, with a good, 6, 12, 18 months of concerted effort, it's definitely something that's possible. And fintechs in particular, I'll say they need people with banking experience. It's a critical skill set. It's an important time within the evolution of the industry to have that level of risk and rigor. I mean, one personal anecdote, the thing that always drove me nuts at bank was all the governance, right? Coming into a scale up, what's actually quite helpful is bringing in some governance and some KPI setting and some tracking methodologies, things that, I personally would never thought would be a skill set, but actually having worked at a bank, I've learned how those can be utilized, cut back a lot of the bureaucracy, simplify, and try to get really to the heart of what we're doing. But actually some of those skills can be quite beneficial in a scale up world, for instance.
I love that. This has been one of the most fun, conversations that I've had. You're so concise with, the mission and your conversation. This has been a beauty of an episode. I can't wait to leave an intro and let people know that they can expect every buzzword, except for AI and blockchain. They can expect everything. CaaS, BaaS, SaaS, we talked about it all. Really appreciate the conversation. And I'm excited even for episode 6. Like now that I know, kind of where you kind of sit, I get so invigorated to your point. I can see why you transition to a company like this is because it feels like you're touching every part of the ecosystem that has a challenge that you can solve for. And that must be an exciting thing to wake up for every morning.
It really is. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. This has been great.
Thanks so much, Ryan. We'll talk to you soon.
Great.